Program is brought to you by Real Estimate, Australia's #1 property value estimate. Get your real estimate today on realestate.com.au.
Welcome back. There are 3,204 auctions scheduled this week. That's up 32% when compared to the same week last year. New South Wales will hold about 1,000 auctions with about 870 of them in Sydney. Victoria will hold about 1,600 auctions with about 1,500 in Melbourne. Queensland will hold about 300 auctions with about 180 in Brisbane. South Australia will hold about 170 auctions with most of them in Adelaide. Western Australia, Tasmania and the NT will hold 23 auctions between them, and the ACT will hold about 120 auctions. Take a look at the most viewed properties going to auction this weekend, and in New South Wales, top property is 6 Barrington Place, Carlingford. This 3-bedder has 2 bathrooms, sits on a large 834 square metre block. The lawn and the garden are the highlight. The top property in Victoria is number 121 High Street, Watsonia. This 3-bedroom weatherboard cottage has been renovated, has space for 1 car. Asking price is $800,000. The top property in Queensland is 49 Sylvester Street, Wilston. This large 4-bedder Queenslander is in Brisbane's northern suburbs. It's got a large backyard and space for 3 cars. Top property in South Australia is 42 Albert Street, Richmond. This 3-bedder is on the fringe of the Adelaide CBD and has an asking price of $640,000. And the top property in Western Australia is 15 Paris Way, Karrinyup. This 3-bedroom cottage sits on 450 square metres and is surrounded by green space. And the most viewed property on the REA Group website this week is 22 Charming Street, Hampton East, which is a bayside suburb in Melbourne, and you might recognise it from last year's TV show The Block, where it was purchased by billionaire Adrian Portelli for $3.25 million. This modern 4-bedroom home has 4 bathrooms and parking for 2 cars. The house sits on about 632 square metres. It's fitted with premium wood deck German-engineered double-glazed windows, European oak floorboards, carpets and brass pendant light fittings. It's got a designer kitchen, in-ground plunge pool and pool house, which could be used as a 5th bedroom or home office or guest suite. The price guide for this one is $2.9 to $3.2 million. So Adrian is clearly struggling to sell it and maybe forced to sell at a loss. And surprisingly, it then says on the ad that it has a $1 reserve at auction. Rental vacancy rates in Australia have plunged to a record low in February, and at the same time, rental affordability is at its worst level in about 17 years. For more on this, I'm joined by Flaherty from REA Group. And thanks so much for your time. Vacancy rates across Australia are just 1.07%. How low is that compared to, say, the pandemic years?
Look, it's significantly under the level that we were seeing in the pandemic years, especially in our capital cities. And what we're seeing is that across Australia, the number of homes that are vacant available to rent is around 50% lower compared to back in March 2020. Unfortunately, the vacancy rate, as you mentioned, has hit a new record low in February, and there really aren't any signs that conditions are going to improve anytime soon for renters.
What are the main factors that are causing vacancy rates to drop so much?
Look, there's a few factors at play. First of all, we are experiencing incredibly strong population growth at the moment. We know that new migrants are more likely to rent in inner city areas, so that puts pressure on those markets. We're also continuing to see more property investors sell than buy, which again reduces that overall supply. And of course, with housing construction costs being so high, we're continuing to see that the speed at which new housing is being supplied, so building approvals, new construction starts, they're all sitting at decade lows. So it's a real mess at the moment, and unfortunately, there's really no quick fix.
Yeah, it looks like it's pretty bad in both Sydney and Melbourne, but how do the regional parts of Australia compare to some of the big capital cities?
Well, actually, we're seeing very similar vacancy rates both across regional Australia and our capital cities. So both the regions and the cities have a vacancy rate of about 1% at the moment. For context, a healthy vacancy rate we would consider as being around 3%. So what we're seeing is that even though vacancy rates did pick up slightly in the year following the end of the pandemic in the regions, that is now starting to come down again.
And Perth, it really stands out. I think it's 0.75% vacancy rate in Perth. Why is it so low in Perth?
Well, Perth is the most difficult market to find a rental property vacant at the moment. One of the key reasons for this is that Western Australia has actually seen the strongest population growth over the past year. So the population of WA increased by 3.1%. It's above what we saw in the other capitals. And that's placed instant pressure on rental availability.
Now, looking at your report, there's also a bit of a mention around rental affordability as well. I mean, how expensive is it at the moment to find a rental property and pay, monthly or weekly rent?
Well, we have seen rental affordability hit the worst levels on record. So not only are there very few properties available for rent, but those that are being advertised for rent are seeing the rents jump very rapidly. What we're even seeing is that tenants are continuing to try and get that competitive edge by offering even higher than the advertised rental rate, purely because people are just so desperate to find a property and secure a property.
Okay, turning to the property sales side of things, this weekend there's about 3,200 homes scheduled to be auctioned. Seems like there's quite a bit of stock on the market for this time of the year.
Well, that's right. It's definitely not a good time to be a renter, but it's actually a reasonably good time to be a buyer at the moment. We've seen a really significant jump in the number of homes being listed for sale, especially in Melbourne and Sydney, where we're seeing about a third more properties for sale compared to the same time last year. Melbourne in particular is going to have an incredibly busy few weeks. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity to snap up a property in Melbourne and also in Sydney over the next few weeks.
And just looking at the auction clearance rates, how have they been tracking? Have they been holding up reasonably well?
Well, actually, auction clearance rates have been holding up very well. We thought that perhaps if we saw a big increase in the number of homes hitting the market, that we might see clearance rates drop. But so far this year, they've actually been holding above the levels seen last year. So what we're seeing is that there's more confidence at the moment. So people are more confident to sell. And at the same time, we're seeing people more confident to buy. And I think the key reason for this is the fact that interest rates look like they've hit their peak, and there may even be declines over the next 12 to 18 months. So I think that's really buoying confidence in the market.
Yeah, looks like there's a lot of properties for sale this weekend in both Melbourne and in Sydney. But looking across the regions, it seems to be quite a bit of stock as well in regional Queensland, for example.
Yeah, that's right. We are seeing listings pick up in the regions as well, though not to the same extent that we saw them pick up in the capital cities. So I think, again, this comes back to the fact that people are more confident in selling conditions at the moment. We know that 12 months ago, sentiment was actually quite negative around whether or not it was a good time to sell. Many of the people that we survey and research and ask, they were identifying this time last year as a bad time to sell. We're really now starting to see a shift. People are recognising that buyer demand is strong. People are seeing that our population is growing rapidly. The supply of new housing isn't keeping up. And I think that there's also a bit of FOMO there. So people thinking, you know what, I better get into the market while I can, because prices are likely only to increase.
And Flaherty, thanks for coming on the program this afternoon.